Welcome back to Create Space, a podcast that finds joy in the art of storytelling. Now, as you know, we've undergone some new branding recently, and Create Space has a new look and a new website, which is so exciting. So to start out, a couple of big thank yous are in order. First of all, Skylar Eichhoff-Fleeman, who is a current WSU grad student. She also did her undergrad with us at the Elliott School as well. Skylar did all of my new branding photos, and she was so awesome to work with. So she and I and my good friend Ricky went down to this really beautiful natural light studio in Wichita, and between Skylar and Ricky, they made me feel so good. I am telling you, best hype team a girl could ask for. And that was one thing that Skylar told me when I was booking with her. You know, I told her I'm a little bit awkward on camera. Like, I don't really know how to pose. I'm a little uncomfortable. And she said, bring a friend with you. She said that's the best way to ensure that you're comfortable and get some really nice natural looking smiles is to bring a friend with you, which I thought was a brilliant idea. So I brought my friend Ricky again that I mentioned. And again, these two were like such a good hype team. It was so much fun. They really just did a good job of helping me feel comfortable. And one thing that I noticed and loved is that Skylar always managed to snap the photo at exactly the right moment when I was looking the most natural. There were definitely times that I was awkward. There is no doubt about that. But she did a really good job of just kind of catching those few subtle natural moments that she knew would make the best pictures. So if you're someone like me and you like getting new headshots and you like branding or lifestyle type photos, but you're a little bit nervous to do them because you're afraid, like, I don't know what to do with my hands or my face or my body or whatever, I would very much encourage you to look up Skylar and book with her because she made the process really painless. And I love the whole photo set. I've shown several of them on the new cover art and on the new website, but I have, gosh, I don't remember how many photos she gave me. I want to say like maybe between 45 and 60, I think. And literally, I liked all of them. So if you are interested in connecting with her, you can look up Skylar Cade Photography on Instagram. So I'm going to spell that for you, and I'll also put it in the show notes. But just in case you don't pop over to the show notes, it's SkylarKade Photography. And no spaces or anything in between those three words. So Skylar Cade Photography. And again, you can look her up on Instagram, see a bunch of her work, and connect with her there. So then I had this, amazing fresh set of photos, and I wanted to do something with it. I was kind of, I loved my old branding, but I felt like it was time to modernize and do something a little bit new. And I had been wanting a custom website for a while as well. Up until this point, I had just been using the plain website that was available to me in Podbean, which is the podcast software that I use. And the Podbean website was fine, but I was ready to get a custom domain and do something else. So I got some design assistance from Tanner Vogt, and he helped me prototype the site in Figma first, and then he used Framer to code it. And the final website is simple and colorful and modern and fresh, and it's absolutely everything that I wanted it to be. So you can see the new website if you haven't yet at createspacepodcast.com. And if you happen to be in the market for some web design help, definitely connect with Tanner Vogt. He is a really talented and creative UI UX designer, and he's based out of Illinois, but he can work with anyone, anywhere. So if you, again, want to connect with him on Instagram, it's simply tanner.vogt. Or I'm also going to include in the show notes a link to his Contra profile if you'd like to go on there and see some of his other website designs that he's worked on, and or connect with him through Contra. Okay, so with the fresh new look to Create Space, I mentioned to you guys on the last episode that I might also be doing some things a little bit differently going forward with content as well. Just figured, why not freshen up everything while we're at it? So one thing that I'd like to do is what I'm going to call student showcase episodes. So as you all know, I'm an instructor, right, at Wichita State, and I have so many talented students that I teach, and every single semester they turn in these projects, and some of them are just absolutely outstanding. Specifically, the class that I think I plan to use to showcase in this podcast is a class I teach that's called Audio Storytelling and Podcasting. Yes, I also teach video editing classes and motion graphics classes and web design classes, but those don't really lend themselves to the audio format for showcasing on the podcast. But incorporating that class and student work with the Create Space podcast really just makes perfect sense. And I'm honestly a little bit annoyed that it took me 37 episodes to think of doing this. So let's do it, right? Let's do it today. Starting today, episode 37, this is going to be the first student showcase episode. So this episode is going to feature a project produced by Grant Seymour. Now, Grant has taken several classes with me, and he's just fantastic every single semester. He's super creative, an incredibly hard worker, detail-oriented, and just always turns in quality work that's at the top of his class. And I could probably, honestly, when I think about it, I could probably feature everything that he's turned in during audio storytelling and podcasting this semester. But there's one project of his specifically that jumped out at me as the project to use to launch the Create Space Student Showcase series. So our first big production assignment is to find a chapter of a chapter book or a short story or a poem or something like that, and use that text to create an audiobook segment. The focus for this assignment is clean, well-recorded narration and an intentionally paced, balanced edit that includes music, Foley sound effects, and the recorded voice tracks, so either narration or dialogue, depending on the text. So I like to start with the audiobook assignment because the text is already provided. So since it's our first big production assignment for the semester, students don't have to stress about what am I going to say? What's a good idea? How should I write the script? What am I going to record? They don't have to focus on the content. Instead, they can take an existing piece of literature and then transform it into an audio piece. So they still get to be creative in terms of creating the soundscape, and then they also get to really hone their technical skills in terms of recording and editing. It's a really fun assignment. Students tend to really enjoy the process. And during that portion of the semester, we also have my colleague, Dr. Katie Lanning, in, and she does a guest lecture called Literature in the Audio Age. So Dr. Katie Lanning is an assistant professor in the English department here at Wichita State. And her presentation is so interesting, and it's great to do during this audiobook section of the class because it talks about how literature has been consumed historically and how the meaning of text changes or shifts as audio begins to play a bigger role in reading. And if you're interested in that topic and you would kind of like to learn maybe a little bit more about it, Dr. Lanning and I actually created a podcast episode on that exact same topic that she guest lectures about, and it's episode 34 of Create Space. So definitely hop back and listen to that if you would like. Now, back to Grant Seymour. So for his audiobook assignment, Grant produced The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. Let's listen to it first, and then I will pop back on at the end to discuss his project a little bit more.
The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. Nervous, very dreadfully nervous I had been. But why will you say that I am mad? Hearken and observe how healthfully, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man. You fancy me mad? Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me, with what dissimulation I went to work. Every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it. Oh, you would have laughed to have seen how cunningly I proceeded. Would a madman have been so wise as this? But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. Then one night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. Perhaps he heard me. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was black as pitch with a thick darkness, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door. "Who is there?" he cried out. I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And now, have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still. But the beat grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now, new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leapt into the room. He shrieked once. Only once. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon his heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring and deposited all between the joists. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught it all. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the door. I went down and opened it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who had introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused, and the police were summoned to search the premises. The shriek, I said, was my own from a bad dream. The old man, he was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bid them search well. I led them at length to his chamber and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, with wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot which reposed the corpse of the victim. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat and chattered familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key, and with violent gesticulations. Why would they not be gone? Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raged, I swore. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no. They suspected. They knew. Indeed, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this. Agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I felt I must scream or die. I could take the hypocritical smiles no longer. Villains, I shrieked. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. It is the beating of his hideous heart.
I just thought this project was executed so flawlessly. In terms of production, the levels were even and accurate, and the entire piece had a really nicely condensed dynamic range that made for a comfortable listen from start to finish. Sometimes if the dynamic range is too wide, I find myself having to turn up the volume and turn down the volume, and it's just challenging and not as comfortable to listen to. But Grant did a really nice job of blending all of those sounds together in a way that made it very comfortable. Also, the narration was well isolated and dry, which made for excellent clarity of the words, which is really important in an audiobook, but especially for an audiobook like this one, because it has this really fast and chaotic tempo. And if you don't focus on the articulation and the clarity of the narration, you're going to lose those words. And so even if the tempo is interesting and the chaotic energy is really cool, if you're not catching those words, it doesn't matter, right? So speaking of the tempo, the pacing is outstanding. I love that there's a substantial variety in the rhythm throughout, right? I think it would have been really easy with this particular piece of literature to just make it fast and chaotic all the way through. But by having that kind of push and pull of the fast parts and the slow parts and just the energy kind of ebbing and flowing throughout the whole piece, it really carries you through the story from beginning to end. And finally, the last thing I want to mention is the way that he built the soundscape and how he managed to use sonic storytelling in a really effective way. The combination of the music, the sound effects, the timing, and the dynamic performance and reading of the text built this truly immersive sound experience for the listener. I have a lot of favorite parts in the story, but one thing that jumped out at me, and I encourage you to go back and listen to this if you can't remember the part that I'm talking about, but Grant put a really intentional pause in the music after the part where he says, there's a line that he says, "You fancy me mad?" And then there's a really brief but intentional pause where the music stops, he's not talking, there's no sound effects, and it's just this like almost an intake of breath, right? It's kind of like just this really loaded silence. And it was such a subtle but effective moment. And there's something that we talk about in class, which is that silence can actually, in a way, be a sound effect. So when used appropriately, well-placed silence can propel the narrative just as well as sound can. And I think that that's something that Grant used effectively throughout, but especially in that particular moment, was using that very brief moment of silence to give the brain a second to absorb what he had just said. Also, the clock sounds. So Grant included several different types of clock sounds throughout the story. He could have just used one repeating element, and a lot of people I think would have done that, but by including the several different types of clock sounds, it helped build that chaos, again, in kind of a subtle but really effective way. So overall, this was honestly one of the best audiobook projects that I've received in the several semesters now that I have taught this class. And I'm so happy to be able to share Grant's work with you today. And I can tell you that this is not the last time that you'll hear of Grant Seymour. He's actually starting a really great new job here soon. And once he's all settled in and ready to go, then I do plan to have him on the show for a more formal interview so that we can just learn more about him and his creative journey, because I'm telling you, it's a really great story. But for now, I hope you enjoyed the very first Student Showcase episode of Create Space. Thank you, Grant, for allowing me to publish your fantastic work, and thank you to all of you out there listening and supporting the show. If you have a free moment this week, please do me a favor and subscribe to Create Space wherever you listen to podcasts. And until I see you again, keep creating, be kind, and seek inspiration from those around you.
This show is part of the ICT Podcast Network. For more information, visit ictpod.net.